Welcome to the first Mentor podcast. Here, you will hear us talk about a variety of topics for the entire family that will hopefully spark a discussion, create a new curiosity, or simply teach you something new. The goal is to inspire you to learn life skills and soft skills not taught in school and prepare you to live an extraordinary life. Come on and spend some time with us on your commute to school or anytime you're free.
Hello, mentees and family of mentees. This is your host and mentor, Vanessa Yang. We're excited again to have you join us for the 23rd episode of the first Mentor podcast. And today we'll be talking about adoption with my friend Holly Choon Hyang Bachman. She's the founder and president of Mixed Roots Foundations and all other organizations related to mixed roots. And you'll learn about her story as an adoptee from South Korea and how she started her organization to help other adoptees. You'll also get the chance to quickly meet one of her mentees, Kabir McNeely, his mixed roots background, and his short film Blue Girl. As usual, at the end, just make sure don't forget to subscribe or add us to your favorite list if you haven't done so already, and share with your friends and family. Now let's get started and talk to Holly. So today on our podcast, we have a very special guest with us. I would like to introduce you to Holly Choon Hyang Bachman, and she's the founder and president of Mixed Roots Foundations, which is serving to improve the experience of those who have been impacted by adoption or foster care. And Holly, welcome to our podcast.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
And I would like to start right away for you to give our listeners a little bit more about your background, about yourself, and maybe just one little thing about sharing what was the coolest things that ever happened to you in your life.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Vanessa. So my name is Holly Choon Hyang Bachman. My birth name was Sung Choon Hyang. I was actually adopted when I was 3.5 years old from South Korea, and in January 20th in 1983, I came to Minnesota. And so it'll be this year my 38th year anniversary of being in America. Growing up, being one of the very few Asians and people of color, my whole family's white. So I think that was I've been very blessed to have a great family, but I think there were some challenges of just, knowing my culture, language, and just also connecting with those that were, different from me. So I also have two older brothers, and they're biological to my adoptive parents.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the only one adopted. My parents actually couldn't have any more children after my two brothers, and so they were really wanting to have a baby girl. It was really when they actually had gone through the process of a couple other adoptions, I think from South America, but then they fell through. So the social worker was like, what about South Korea? And they're like, okay.
Why not?
Exactly. It actually took about 6 years for them to, from the beginning to start the adoption process to the end. And I wasn't even born yet. But then in 1983, I became available, and they adopted me as their third child of being, their baby girl they could never have. And they always talk about, it's meant to be. And I would say, with connecting to my roots, my parents have always been very proactive of, I went to Korean culture camps. And even though growing up, I never wanted to be connected to that, because I was like, oh, who are those Asian people?
I can hear you.
It's just because I didn't, I wasn't surrounded by that. And there's actually a story when we went to Florida. I was maybe about 5 or 6 years old, and it was actually in the South, Florida, Southern. It was like, I think it was a Chinese restaurant, but there were African Americans, Blacks that were serving.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of came out with this one comment, like, kind of like, who are all these Chinese people? and they were, African Americans. So it was just very telling about how, the development of identity and just, perception, and leading to that next question that you had is probably the most powerful experience I had, which basically changed my life. There was this this essay contest from my adoption agency, Children's Home Society, and it was in partnership with the government of South Korea. And it was an essay contest of what would a trip to Korea mean in my life. and it was about 400 word essay. And at first I wasn't really interested. I'm like, Korea, and my mom encouraged me to write
Mm-hmm.
it. And she helped me write it. Out of 1,200 applicants, 45 got reviewed and 16 actually won and got to go on their trip to Korea.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Motherland Tour. So that was in 1995. So I was about 16 years old. It was just amazing because I was able to see people that look like me, successful, see the Korean culture. At that time, one of the other supporting organizations was the largest branch of the largest church in the world, Church of Incheon, and in Incheon. And it was a pretty amazing experience because I had never experienced that. And I think out of all the youth that went, I think the only one that never had been back to Korea since I was adopted. So that, I would say, was one of my most memorable and impactful experiences that really
Bet.
helped me understand my Korean roots and my cultural identity.
Yes. For you to be selected out of so many candidates, I would love to read your essay one day if you still have it.
I do.
Share that with me later.
I'm going to frame it.
Okay, you should. But I wanted to learn a little bit more about your professional career, right?
Mhm.
And how you started the organization, Mixed Root Enterprises and Mixed Roots Foundations and all the subsidiaries. And you are now currently the founder and the president. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So just really quickly, the whole concept of mixed roots actually evolved out of a high school cultural diversity group that I helped found back in 1995, pretty much right after my first trip to Korea. And it was actually the Mixed Roots Cultural Diversity Student Group, and really rooted in social justice. We actually, a group of us international students, African American, Somali, Hmong, me being Korean, we all would do these breakfasts with the principal and the administration. And we actually organized to the extent where we were able to finally get Dr. King recognized and get that school day off for the school
Wow.
district.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So that was pretty cool. And then as we continued to organize, and I got more involved with the government, with working with the mayor, and then even working with the Steele County Free Fair, which is one of the largest county fairs in Minnesota. We coordinated like an international night. And, again, it was just my passion, and what I've discovered is really bringing people together. And I
Yes.
think with the mixed roots concept, I actually had the opportunity to go back to Korea a second time in 2010. And that's where actually a year later is where I established the Mixed Roots Foundation. The trip that I went on the second time was as an adult. And so I actually had the opportunity to try to do a birth search. Did not find birth
Wow.
family,
Yeah.
but I did see where I was actually born. I went to my orphanage and saw baby pictures for the first time.
That's amazing.
And got to see and find out my real birthday is actually August 15th and not August 10th.
Wow. I know all this time you didn't know your real birthday, right? I know. That's amazing.
Exactly. And I think growing up, I never had baby pictures. So as
Yeah.
I was getting on the plane, I called my mom and dad. I said, Mom, Dad, you now have baby pictures of all your kids.
Aw.
Yeah. But yeah, so kind of fast forward, Mixed Roots Foundation with the principal roots of diversity and social justice and multiculturalism. Now there's this whole cause of adoption and foster care. Not sure if you knew, but 6 in 10 people in the United States are connected to adoption in some way.
That many? I wasn't aware of that.
There's
Wow.
over 100 million people of us. And then I always joke, being from Minnesota, 1 in every 10 Korean Americans are adopted in the United States, and over 20,000 of them are from Minnesota.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we are a force. We are still the largest international adoption population in the world. The second is China and Ethiopia. And then from a foster care standpoint, over 500,000 kids are in the foster care system. And where I am in LA County, LA County has the largest foster care adoption foster care population. And where we brought in foster care is a lot of, hope to be for foster youth are adopted out of foster care. In many ways, hopefully also being reunited with birth families. But so we saw a very strong connection between the two. And so we support both raising awareness and funds for the adoption and foster care community.
That's amazing.
So, and this is where I kind of bring into where with starting Mixed Roots Foundation, we started an ambassador program, and actually being in San Francisco at the time of founding the organization in 2011 is when we were starting to work with Major League Baseball, where we were doing adoptee nights. An adoptee night is a special night for all who are touched by adoption and foster care. And I have to give credit to the San Francisco Giants. They were the first Major League Baseball team to step up to the cause and also introduce me to, at the time, the president of AT&T of California, which is Ken McNeely. And reason being is he's an adoptive parent. So I was just like overjoyed. And that's actually how I got to meet his whole family. And hopefully I can introduce you to who now is serving as our one of our founding junior ambassadors, Kabir McNeely. I've actually known him since he was about 6 years old, I think, now 15.
Yes.
It was third grade, I think. We were shooting a PSA.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been a while now.
Yes. Kabir, tell us a little bit more about your background. Would love to get to know you a little bit better.
Well, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was adopted at birth transracially by an African American dad, Ken McNeely, and by an Indian American dad who's an immigrant.
Wow.
And I was raised in San Francisco. I actually met my birth mother when I was 10, I believe. Yeah, I was in 5th grade.
That must have been quite an experience, huh?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit more about how you're involved with Mixed Roots as a junior ambassador.
I met Holly, I was around 7. I also had this idea that I wanted to start my acting career. So I ended up shooting another PSA. And then actually Holly and I sort of went out of touch for a couple of years. And then I reached out to her to get the clip for one of the PSAs so I could use it for a demo reel.
Yes.
And then from there, we had an Instagram campaign, and I've just become more and more involved. I mean, what they do is something I've always been quite passionate about, being adopted and also understanding from my parents the importance of diversity and multiculturalism and just being exposed. And my parents, like Holly's, were also quite proactive about exposing me to my birth parents and to my roots, even though I've never met my biological father. I've always been going to like affinity groups and they've been taking me to places like I went because I'm part British. They took me to London a few years ago. And so, yeah, they have also been very proactive about exposing me to my roots and to the culture.
It's so important, I think. And so you said you're partially British. So what other ethnicities make up your background? You're probably very diverse yourself then.
Yes.
He's very mixed roots as well.
Yeah, so I'm part British and Irish, although I've never been to Ireland. I'm part Spanish on my biological father's side. I have been to Spain, and my parents have also been proactive about, exposing me to other like Hispanic classmates and, making sure I would always go to like Hispanic affinity groups and exposing me to the language. I had a Peruvian babysitter for about 10 years, and we actually talked a lot about learning Spanish, although they didn't want me to learn at such a young age, just fearing I would not speak English as much.
Yeah, that's the concern of a lot of parents. I've heard that before, yes.
Right. No, but I'm taking Spanish right now, and they really want to expose me to the language. We're actually looking at an abroad program right now to have the possibility of like a quarter a semester.
That's great. You should do that.
And Spain is actually one of the options that we were looking at.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then Kabir, you also have a sister, right?
I do. I have a sister who's also adopted named Mira.
And she's younger or older?
She's younger. She's currently in 8th grade.
Mhm. And she's mixed roots too, right?
Yes.
Kabir's family is really our poster mixed roots.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds
Right.
like it. That's amazing. I love it. And Holly also told me about this little project that you've been working on. So mention that really quickly.
Yes, it's a short film called Blue Girl, which I mean, I'm surprised, honestly, by how much goodness has come out of it because it's 4.5 minutes,
Hmm.
a little bit less than that, actually. As of right now, it's an official selection at 4 film festivals,
Wow. Look at
and it
you.
plays, and it placed as a finalist at 1 film festival.
Oh,
And we're waiting to hear still from 97 others.
wow. You're going to be the expert of all film festivals soon, huh? That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, because it's remote, I have been able to actually work with an international cast, which is something I've never done before. So it's been very exciting to also have a film which features people who are from different places,
Hmm.
with different cultures and different families, and also some cast members who are on the LGBTQ plus spectrum.
Yes.
The protagonist is a lesbian girl coming
Hmm.
out to a classroom. So it was very important to also give some of the roles to people who are in the LGBTQ plus
Hmm.
community.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. So if somebody's interested in watching this short film, where can they find your short film?
The film is available on YouTube, Vimeo, and Dailymotion. It also depends on the film festivals, which ones screen it. It might be available on some of those platforms as well,
Okay.
but it's
And
out there.
they can find you at what tag, and then that's probably where that can lead them to the film too, right?
Oh, yes, they can find me on social media at Kabir MCN, so KABIR MCN, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the social media.
Yes. You're going to have a lot of people reach out to you, which is amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
Absolutely.
thank you. Thank you
And
for having me.
Okay. I'm going to turn it back to you, Holly.
perfect.
So I really love your tagline. It's so simple in 3 words that just say so much, which
Hmm.
is identity, diversity, and unity.
Hmm.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more around the meaning behind those words for you?
Absolutely. It's so funny. It was way back in 2011 when I was actually at like a bar restaurant, and I wish I had the napkin because
Uh-huh.
I may have it, but I literally was trying to map out the whole mixed roots concept or the foundation, and it came out as identity, diversity, unity. My degree is actually in sociology and social psychology, and so
Mhm.
when you think about just your, kind of what I thought about is your 3-step process of becoming your full self. And what's so rooted, and you'll notice within the logo there's a brown root, and
Mhm.
that's where share where that signifies your identity. That's like who you are to the
Mhm.
core. And
Mhm.
then there's these multicolor roots, which is your diversity. And then you'll notice that they're uniting at the top, and that's the unity. It's kind of like you can't know others until you know yourself. Even to know and experience others, you need to experience them and engage with them. And so kind of the whole identity piece is like really know who you are. And then you go to the next phase of what you are.
Mhm.
I kind of went through that through my own cultural identity process
Yes.
of being white, but then, oh, actually I'm Korean and I'm Asian, and oh, guess what? There is racism out there. And
Yes.
and it's like, 'cause I kind of grew up in a little bit of a bubble. Interestingly enough, though, I have been reminded by my middle older brother that even in high school, he would actually get teased and actually get into fights because he had a chink sister.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I didn't really find out about that till later in life. And it just kind of breaks my heart to know
Yeah.
that he was really standing up for me. And even to this day, we have those conversations that he just saw me as a sister, but there is discrimination out there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
And that's
so
why it's so important for us to create awareness, right? It's supposed to be normal, but I don't know why people always have to hone in what's different. Different supposed to be celebrated.
Exactly. And of course, it's the curiosity. And even with mixed families or even like a Kabir's family of like when you have so much difference, there is a human nature of like, how did that happen? And even with my family, I'll be walking in the mall one day with my family and people look at me and like, okay, is that the guy's girlfriend? And no, that's my brother.
Yes,
I
yes.
almost felt like I had to wear a sign on me saying I'm his sister and,
I
he's
know.
my
You
brother.
always have to like make sure it's clear and kind of clarify before people even ask because that's on their mind.
Exactly, because that, yeah, they're thinking of that. And I think, the next step of so once you go through your identity, your diversity stage, well, and the diversity stage is actually really critical and really probably the longest stage is that you've got to know yourself, you know who you are. But then that's really when you can step out of yourself to other people. And that
Yes.
could be the breaking the barriers of engaging with someone that's totally different race or religion or
Mm-hmm.
economic status. And I think, when you're secure with yourself, then you have the ability to go beyond yourself and interact with other people that are different from you.
Yeah.
The third stage of really where I feel I am at is, and it actually has been my mission in life, is bringing unity
Mm-hmm.
among people, and in whatever capacity. So I've actually known my mission probably since about sixth grade. And
Wow.
so in whatever I've done, it's either networking, connecting people, bridging people. I know me and you have had that conversation before,
Yeah.
just the human connection, but helping and serving and just figuring out how you can support people and it's rewarding. I'm a mentor as well, and I think having that giving back and that unity purpose really allows that liberation of humanity, I think.
Mhm.
But that's been my passion where I get really excited about, and that's kind of how Mixed Roots Foundation has evolved. And I kind of actually describe Mixed Roots Foundation as kind of like the chamber for adoption foster care, because we have, we're not necessarily a direct service, but we have all these different resources that we can connect people to, and especially raising that awareness. We're in our 10-year anniversary now in 2021, and we've built some amazing partnerships and relationships, some campaigns like, Kabir mentioned earlier. We just launched a foster challenge to support foster youth, especially during the pandemic last year.
Yeah.
And we've teamed up with Philip Bailey of Earth, Wind and Fire. I mean, who would ever
Wow, look at you.
thought of that, have know and work with his daughter. So, there's just been some really cool ways of how we can kind of get the message out of unity, but,
Mhm.
even within family. And I think that's what's so powerful about that I say IDU, your identity, diversity, unity, is because it can be applicable to just in general, universal as humans,
Mhm.
but also it can actually be very applicable to your adoption story.
Yes, I love that because I feel like you mentioned the numbers earlier. So that was surprising to me too, because if you yourself have never been exposed to it, you don't even know, or sometimes that conversation doesn't even come up, right?
Exactly.
Yes. So I wanted to share with our listeners because you probably know either children who were adopted or parents who adopted other kids.
Mhm.
Like maybe some of the celebrities or people that which one would be surprising for where people are like, oh, I didn't know he or she was adopted or he or she adopted children. So can you maybe give us a few names so just to create awareness a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, and this actually goes right to when I first started the foundation in 2011 when I found out Steve Jobs was adopted.
Yeah, that was a
And
surprise to me too.
and you're going to think this is crazy, and maybe sharing more than I need to. But once I found out, I was living in San Francisco Bay Area. So
Ah,
I actually found his address and I tried to deliver a Mixed Roots poster to him at his house.
you did not. You knew where
And
he lived. That's
I,
amazing.
someone was telling me, a colleague of mine was like, Holly, you got some balls.
You do.
But I was just so inspired because I'm like, oh my gosh, Steve Jobs is adopted. I can do and be anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and quite a few other celebrities, who I actually had the honor to work with is Apple Diap of the Black Eyed Peas. So
Mm,
he's the Filipino African American Black artist with the Black Eyed Peas.
yeah.
He was adopted from the Philippines to the United States. I think he was about around 15, 14, 15 years old.
Hmm.
A lot of people didn't know that.
I didn't know that
You know,
either. Yeah.
Tim McGrath, Faith Hill, Kristen
Oh.
Chenoweth, Melissa Gilbert. of the Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah,
Jamie Foxx was adopted.
really.
This was really interesting as DNA testing has emerges. LL Cool J actually did the Finding Your Roots series, and he found out that his mother was adopted. I think that was just really telling that, and also underscores the importance of why that statistic of 6 in 10 people are touched by adoption, because
Hmm.
people don't even realize, like, I've had people come up to me saying that my mom is adopted or my sister's adopted,
Yeah,
but the parental adoption is so important because people forget that they're also missing half of their DNA if they're
true.
a child of an adoptee.
Yeah.
And so it just domino effects about the importance of knowing that history, not only physically, but even culturally. And as you see those ancestry DNA commercials or even 23andMe, who we actually work with very closely, is, of course, as being adopted too, is the health and medical information.
Oh,
You
yes,
know,
yes.
I always say, everyone has mixed roots, right?
That's so true. Especially in the
And
future, all of us can. Nobody's like pure one thing or another.
exactly. And I think that's what's so universal about the mixed roots message, but then also how we can reach out to people that are touched by the cause, per some of these kind of celebrity folks. Patty Stanger, she was the millionaire matchmaker. She was adopted. And then you even just break it down to, I got introduced, I was working with the Minnesota Twins and through my adoption agency to do this adoptee night. And they introduced us to the Minnesota Vikings.
Mm.
And did not know that the general manager of the Minnesota Vikings, Rick Spielman, has 6 adopted children out of foster care,
Wow.
all African American. The executive VP, Rob Brzezinski, he has 5 children adopted from South Korea. So, I mean, it's, so between the
Yeah.
two of them, they have like 11 adopted children between
Wow.
the families.
It's
Yeah.
just the tip of the iceberg, because once you kind of dig further, you find this
Oh, just
whole right underneath so much more to the story.
Oh, absolutely. And to find out and you made a very good point that when people are not aware, and even Kabir mentioned this too, is when they're not aware or exposed to it, they're not going to know who is connected. But then when they start thinking about it, they're going to realize, oh my gosh, my sister-in-law is adopted. My coworker adopted these kids, and it just becomes a whole new world for them. Yeah.
Yes. Going back to your concept and kind of the different stages and phases, right? So some of the listeners might be teenagers or young adults who kind of finally embrace that identity. And let's say it's either the children or the parents, right? And now they listen to this episode and they become really curious. So
Mhm.
can you maybe tell a little bit more about the services or products that your company offers that could help
Absolutely.
them?
Absolutely. Yeah, so for Mixed Roots Foundation, we have our kind of 2 core programs, which is mentoring and
Hmm.
then DNA testing. And there's a sub service with the DNA testing and with search and reunion. For the younger youth, we really kind of emphasize the mentoring program or initiative, which is the Adoptee Mentoring Partnership.
Hmm.
And it was actually formerly the Adoptee Mentoring Program, which was actually founded by a fellow adoptee in the Bay Area. And she's actually still involved to this day. She's serving on our advisory committee. But the whole purpose of that program is really to connect other young adoptees to one another, and then also to just be a resource for adoptive parents. There is a unique bond and an
Hmm.
experience of being adopted. I always share with people that, like, maybe try to get political or have their own maybe negative view of adoption, is or the adoption experience, is that it's fundamental to our identity of being adopted.
Hmm.
I always say, like, I would not be here if my birth mother did not give me up for adoption, but I
Yes.
also probably would not be here or would not be maybe in the same family if I had not been fostered, had my foster care mother. But then I also wouldn't be here if my adoptive family had not
Hmm.
adopted me. So there's a whole navigation of relationships
Yeah.
of adoptees that people don't even have a clue or even take for granted of,
It's
that
very
we have
true.
to, navigate. And it's complex. There's this kind of training out there that really is being applied now more with even therapy and social psychology, clinical psychology, is the trauma informed care of really understanding that adoption, whether good or bad, there is a level of trauma
Hmm.
and separation.
Yeah.
And I think when people, even as adoptees themselves, can understand that they have experienced trauma. And trauma, a lot of people think is maybe physical abuse or domestic violence. Not necessarily. It's the internal. And I think interesting with open adoption, the adoptive parents or the birth parents select the adoptive parents so they know each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there is this research that shows that birth mothers, when they're planning their adoption process, is that the baby in the womb knows that. And
Really?
that there's that scientific and just the energy and that's why it's so important when that process happens that there's that support and
Mm-hmm.
consistency and education awareness, because there is that biological physical connection of a child and a mother.
Yeah.
And when that gets broken, there's attachment issues and there's abandonment, rejection.
Yes. I read that I remember reading Steve Jobs' book. That was
Uh-huh.
his big thing. Why did she give me up? That big question that drove his career and success ultimately, but still.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. And a lot of people that may not be able to talk about that, but it's internalized. And I think
Mm-hmm.
where the support that we have from mentors, for other adoptees and just being able to talk about it. And I think that you can bring that out and also, and to be proud about it,
Of
because there
course,
is a historical, misperception and misconception of that adoption is bad. You're given up
True.
because or even in foster care, you're in foster care because you're a bad kid and we didn't want you. Or back in the day, particularly with international adoption, a lot of Asian kids were exported out because they were mixed. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't socially accepted. So that, can really mess with some people's
I bet.
identity and who they are and self-esteem. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done to kind of raise that awareness, because there is that whole also positive side that I am grateful to have been adopted. I always had this fantasy of where would I be if I wasn't, but
right.
could I have been with like a, like
it makes you who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually did some research on my own as well, that looking at if the adoptee has a reasonable, a good relationship with the adoptive family, they seem to be more adjusted and also have that better outlook on the adoption experience versus if they don't have that kind of connection or support, then obviously as you can imagine, and especially if there's negative things that may have happened, and then a tailspin of other negatives. And that support of the adoptive family is really critical. And kind of going back to your question with children and adoptive parents is, especially from a race and culture standpoint, more and more kids of color are being adopted. And I think that's really important to kind of what Kabir had mentioned earlier, and myself, is really making sure that child is being connected to their culture.
Yes, that's important.
Well, and also as an adoptive parent, I mean, I kind of, not to put my parents on blast, but I always wondering, why don't they have friends of color? Basically responded that there just wasn't any in Owatonna, Minnesota.
They want it, but there's nobody close by.
Exactly. I thought about too, there were some Korean restaurants that they could drive. Again, we were about an hour south of Minneapolis, St. Paul, but because my first introduction of any Asian food of what I can remember other than rice was was Chinese takeout. The first time I had kimchi was when I went to Korea when I was 16 years old, and also trying to learn the chopsticks.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Right? Because they look at you and they expect you to know how to use chopsticks.
Oh my gosh, my trip to Korea that I had one back when I was 16, one of our first stops was at this really nice restaurant, and we had chopsticks, and I was trying to use them and I was fumbling a little bit, and this server came over to me, slapped my hand and gave me a fork. That's when I realized I better quickly learn this, otherwise it's gonna be a long trip.
Oh, that's hilarious. But the other curious question I had, as a kid or growing into a teenager, identity and questioning about who you are so important. When do you suggest, or from your experience, do parents have that conversation? Because I lived in a bubble, so growing up, I didn't have friends who were adopted or parents who adopted kids. But when I came to the US as an adult, there was more stories like that. So some said, I was afraid to talk to my kid about it, so they found out by surprise, and then there was this whole story. And others said, no, from day one, they are aware of their background.
People ask me, like, when did you find out you're adopted? I'm like, pretty much at the beginning, because I'm the only Asian in the
You look
family.
different, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very different. But no, but there is that level too of what you're saying is just even talking about, because I did have some challenging conversations with, even with particularly with my mom, about why don't we talk about adoption? She's an early childhood special ed teacher. And so
Mm.
I think sometimes parents can be sometimes too close to the situation and realize
Mm-hmm.
that what they apply outside the family to, like, hey, these are my own kids dealing with some of these issues. And I agree with the latter, what you talked about when parents say from day one. I've been very blessed that my parents kept all my stuff from being adopted. Like
Oh,
I
wow.
have I call them my little clothes. I literally came on January 20th in 1983 with just the clothes on my back. And
Uh-huh.
I still have those clothes. And my mom cut out, pictures, kind of like they do like an adoption book.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because I've heard horror stories of adoptees, and they call them LDAs, which is late
Mm-hmm.
discovery adoptee, where
Mm-hmm.
they find out that they're adopted like even when they're adults. And
Yes.
I don't know, just, again, not to get political or anything, but I think a child should know who they are and where they come from. Because that's just, again, going back to your identity. And I
Yeah.
think there's already a sense of trust or brokenness with the
Mm-hmm.
birth mother, and then to have that happen again,
Yeah.
hiding
Good point.
or being in secret. There's a lot of parents out there that don't have the intention of hurting, but they actually may be overprotecting by
Yes.
not saying anything
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to hurt them. My parents always told me that I was doubly loved. I was
Oh, I
doubly
like
loved
that.
to be given up and then doubly loved to be adopted. But again, it's such an interesting community because there is such expanse of range of experiences.
I
So,
bet.
as the foundation, it's an actual 501c3 foundation, and we embrace and support all adoption experiences. Going back to what you're asking, is that I think it's so important that people know, as much as they can about who they are right away. It's a process, it's a journey. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what parents can also really explain to their children, is that your journey of being adoption is a lifelong journey.
I really love how you came up with the name mixed roots, because it could mean so many different things.
Yeah,
Your parents have two different backgrounds. You being ethnically 100% Korean, but then having Caucasian parents. Or I even include myself. I grew up with my own family in an Asian environment, but I grew up in Germany. So I feel like
yeah.
mentally I have two ethnicities within me as I was growing up. So it could mean so many different things.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always say mixed roots runs very deep, but they're still growing, and they're intermingling with one another, and that can be spiritually, biologically, racially, culturally, economically. And that's why it's so universal, I think, for everybody, because the root, as you know, even as a plant, is what keeps you grounded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's your identity. And when you have those roots grounded, it's so powerful, because you and I know, with ones that don't have those roots, it's scary. And it doesn't matter at what point, at whatever that person's stage in life, that when you don't have those roots grounded, it could be a totally different outcome. So the
Yeah.
more people can know their own roots, but then get to know other roots, that's mixed roots, but then there's a synergy and then also a unity that happens where people can be more happy, and you improve lives and being positive, and particularly for kids, creating that continuity of who they are.
I'm sure you have a gazillion stories to share, but I wanted to go back into your teenage years specifically.
Whew.
Growing up, looking Korean and Asian, but in a very white neighborhood, what are some of the really unforgettable memories or stories, like maybe one or two, that you would like to share with us?
There's two I can just kind of name off of. One of them is on more of not so happy side, getting made fun of having, slanted eyes, Asian
Yep.
eyes.
Yep. I got
Um, I
that
re-
too.
I remember one of my fellow students would say, "You're too dark. You were in the oven too long." That type of thing.
Yeah. Mean.
Because it is interesting. Some people are like, "You're not Korean. You're too dark, and you have eyelashes." I'm like, and then at that point, I'm like, well, maybe I am mixed. The other one is, again, dealing with family, and this is just like, oh my gosh, So we're at a family wedding, and I think, standing next to my mom, and she was another relative, I found out, but she came up to my mom and said, "Is that Nathan's new girlfriend?" And And my mom just started laughing and she goes, no, that's Holly. And this is, of course, at a wedding where you don't see relatives forever. And then,
Yeah.
being in a different, within a context of, with family of what you look like. And it's been interesting. And that's kind of tying back to mixed roots, is that why mixed roots also exists, is that I've never felt like I fit anywhere. And
I
so
can relate.
right. And so when you have a mixed roots or multicultural environment, you can kind of just breathe, because you can just be yourself and not feel like you're having to compare yourself like with other whites or even other Asians. I mean, I came from Minnesota to California, I think, almost 15 years ago. And when I went to San Francisco Bay Area, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most Asians I've seen in my life. And then when I moved to LA, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most Koreans I've seen in my life. K-Town here in LA is the largest population out of Seoul.
Right. I know LA
Um,
has a lot of ethnically diverse towns, so to speak.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's why I feel so comfortable being here actually in LA. Although on the flip script of Minneapolis, a lot of people forget that if you look at the context of the Midwest, Minneapolis is really a kind of a best kept secret of diversity. A lot of people forget that there's over, 18, maybe even plus now, global world headquarters based in Minneapolis. You have
That's right.
Target, Best Buy, Medtronic, Seagate, General Mills, 3M, kind of the international, global commerce there. But then also, they have the largest Somali population. They have the second largest Hmong population. They've actually also have exceeded significantly compared to, say, San Francisco, the LGBTQ community. It's really fascinating. And then there's somewhat of a Vietnamese community there as well. And then, of course, a large, Hispanic, and then they would call it migrant community coming up from the south to work the farms of the countryside of Minnesota.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to experience that type of diversity. And then, of course, being in LA, you can be mixed with anything and you would never know it. So
exactly. That's what I love about LA too, because when you have such a diverse background, sometimes you have to check off boxes or you have to put yourself in categories. Like people ask you where you're from. That's always my favorite.
I know, right? I always say, do you want the long story or the short story?
Yes, exactly. I say the same thing. I'm like, well, it depends from what angle you look at it. But it's a long story. That's why I always start. So I have a short version now, but it is a long story.
Exactly.
And I love the mixed root concept, because sometimes I agree with you. I had a hard time growing up, especially when I came to the US, when people ask me, where are you from? I'm like, well, I'm from Germany. And when I go on vacation, especially, they're like, where are you from? Should I say LA, California, Germany, Chinese? Like what answer should I give?
Exactly.
But
it's almost like, what do you want? What do you want? I'll, whatever you want, I'll tell you.
I have multiple choices for you, right?
Exactly.
So when we speak of people with a diverse background, it's great for those people to have a home where it's like, who cares about your background? You just look at you as a person that you are and connect with others who have a similar background, or just similar meaning very diverse, not unique in one box only, so to speak.
Exactly. Because even culturally, you look at all the diversities in the race, and even, again, going back to kind of the adoption cause of transracially, it's like, I always say that my heritage is Korean, but to be honest, my culture is white. I grew up in the white culture. So I think for people to kind of grasp that and, really understand how the impact of culturalism and just the social impact too, and then just your own way of dealing with that too. And that goes back to your identity.
Yeah. And I know throughout the 10 years, you probably dealt with so many different families and their stories. And I would love to hear also maybe one or two transformation stories that you would like to share, your favorite ones.
Well, thank you. My mentee in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, her name is Madeline. Been mentoring her since about 13 years old, and met her through the adoptee mentor program at the time, and got her involved with mixed roots beyond that when we kind of took under the program of the A&P. And this is such a great story. Is she was going online one day and she found mixed roots chips, and so I took it upon myself to find out where these people are that has these mixed roots chips. And since then, we've built a partnership with this Mixed Roots, the manufacturer of these Mixed Roots chips. And I have her actually on the poster on the back of the postcard
uh-huh.
with her Mixed Roots shirt on. But she's now serving as an ambassador. She's kind of as Kabir is a founding ambassador. But what's really been amazing is that seeing her grow as a person,
Yeah.
where even though she's Chinese adopted, and talk about another Mixed Roots family, her mother is Jewish and her dad is German. So,
Yes, right.
right, just that mix. But also, I think we've been able to really dialogue about just being adopted, but also then we talk about the differences too, because she's Chinese adopted, I'm Korean adopted. But there's also similarities. I think we've had conversations about how do you respond when people ask you this question or that question.
Yeah.
So it's been really rewarding to see her grow. And then she just this year graduated from San Francisco State University.
Oh, that's
So,
amazing.
so for me, having mentored her and went to her high school graduation, which feels like just yesterday, and then now she's graduated from college, it's hard to believe. But then to have her still be involved with the foundation and really become family, particularly even with her parents. We're actually going to jump on a Zoom later tonight and just connect, and we give each other updates. And so that's one really cool story. Yeah.
Love that. That's amazing because I think it's so important, right, to see hopefully she will become a mentor herself in the future for somebody
Exactly.
else who's going through everything that she's been through.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And I know you mentioned all these amazing events, right? But where can they find more information about events that might be upcoming or past events where they can watch videos or just learn more? I assume that's on your website.
Yes, absolutely. You can check out mixedrootsfoundation.org. And
Hmm.
we also are on all social media, which is at Mixed Roots. So Mixed Roots for Twitter, Facebook is Mixed Roots Foundation, but Twitter and Instagram. We also have a YouTube page. Actually outlines all the PSAs and videos as even with the one with Kabir in it. That actually would give you a good snapshot of all of our different events we've done. And then also our Facebook album documented all of our different past events that way. And then as far as future events, definitely we try to post on Facebook, Instagram.
Hmm.
When we do featured events, they'll be on our homepage. We are trying to develop and be more proactive of holding a calendar. It's so busy to ultimately be great to have other people post their events on this kind of community calendar,
Hmm.
because we really want to be that one-stop resource for people
Yeah.
to say, hey, trusted events or resources that they can come here and get that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, mixedrootsfoundation.org and or at Mixed Roots.
Yes, and I would highly encourage anybody who's interested in learning about more about the organization and getting to know Holly's background and everybody she's working with, either to go on the social media pages that she mentioned or on their website, right? Because I think that's just so amazing, all the things you do. And I know I want you not to overwhelm people because I know we could talk about so many things and
Yes.
overwhelm, but just enough to create some curiosity so people can look into things a little bit more further. The youth today is just so resourceful anyways, right? The internet is at their fingertip. My kids find out things and learn things faster than I do. So
Yeah, exactly. And we're always looking for ambassadors and junior ambassadors, so that might be, if someone wants to actually more formally get involved, we have
yeah.
multiple ways of people volunteering or serving in this greater cause of Mixed Roots. So.
Yes. And before we wrap up, Holly, what are you most excited about the future developments on Mixed Fruits? There's a few
Oh.
new and exciting things coming up, you told me. So share that with us before you
Oh,
go.
absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, so we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary. Month to month, we are actually going to be, our 10-year anniversary is in May, and so which is also recognized as National Foster Care Month. And we are looking to relaunch our DNA testing project as well in April. That's called the Global Adoptee Genealogy Project. And we have an exciting film that we're hoping we'll share more about. But for May is going to be a pretty big month, and
Hmm.
we're going to be hosting our second annual Foster Challenge, which is going to be benefiting our Foster Challenge Emergency Fund, which supports foster youth. And it really got started and ignited by the pandemic last year.
Hmm.
We raised about $32,000 last year, and we distributed to our community partners nationwide. So we're looking to hopefully do that again this year. We did get some products trying to raise some funds, and so
Hmm.
we're going to be making available some of our Mixed Roots face masks. And
Yeah.
And then also we have some other things coming out. So, to stay tuned. And who knows if Major League Baseball comes back into play.
Yeah.
That was really a big hit for us and a hit in a way of exciting, and then also a big hit negatively last year. All of our games got canceled. So,
Yeah.
and they're one of our biggest fundraising signature events. And so if we're able to kind of at least do a kind of a quasi event with them, we would be hosting in San Francisco, LA, Minneapolis, and New York. And so hopefully if that comes into play, we'll be winding up for all that, and we'll definitely be letting everyone know about that.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. I learned a lot from you, and I'm really excited and wanted to thank you for everything you do. Because I don't know how you do it all, but you really benefit everybody who's going through these tough times, just finding their identity, learning about diversity, and then eventually, finding their roots in unity. So that's amazing.
Thank you so much. And I forgot to mention another important date is
Yeah.
November, which is National Adoption Awareness Month. So we're really hoping that we're going to do something big as we close out our 10-year anniversary. I'm so honored to having you reach out, and I'm kind of new to this of being interviewed. I'm usually behind the scenes. So
yeah, you and I are both new. We're learning together.
That's right. Exactly. From grassroots to mixed roots.
That's right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed our interview with Holly. And you can find more about her and Mixed Roots Foundations at mixedrootsfoundation.org. And especially read about their second annual Foster Challenge, since May is National Foster Care Month. And my interview with Holly really opened my eyes on the extent of adoption and how many people it actually touches. Now, if you haven't been exposed to it yourself, you probably haven't even thought about the potential confusion adoptees are facing growing up about their own identity, right? So my challenge to you today is reach out to a friend who might either be adopted themselves or might have family members that are adopted, right? Ask them about their experience and learn a little bit more. And this will most likely lead to an amazing discussion and result in a closer relationship, because relationships are so important. Now, I would love to hear more about your experience. If you'd like, please share with us on Instagram, #FirstMentorStreet. Remember, first is spelled 1ST. And you can also find us on Instagram under 1ST_mentor_street, or visit our website, firstmentorstreet.com. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. Have an amazing day.